What is a true fact so baffling, it should be false? The record for most children born to one mother is 69, to the wife of Fyodor Vasiliev, b. 1707 c. 1782, a peasant from Shy Russia. In 27 labors, she gave birth to 16 pairs of twins, 7 sets of triplets and 4 sets of quadruplets. A sound could travel through space. The roar of the sun would be deafening, even though it's 93 miles away. Because space is a vacuum. Sound can't travel through a vacuum. Obviously lots of other things in the universe would change, and yes, presumably other stars and planets would make noise too. We probably all die screaming as the Earth itself imploded from the pressure of traveling so fast, though a universe that wasn't a vacuum. Yes, Jesus Christ, Rick and Morty, as hundreds of you have pointed out. From 1613 and 1620 a samurai traveled to Rome by way of Mexico. During this time, Shakespeare was still alive, Virginia had been founded for around a decade, Galileo was accused of heresy, and Pocahontas arrived in England. He met the Pope. He was made a Roman citizen. His name was Hasekura Tsunekiage, and was the last Japanese person to officially visit Europe until around 1860. Another fun samurai fact, Oda Nobunaga had a black man as an official samurai. This was in 1581. Where exactly the man was from, Mozambique as most historians guess, and what his name was weren't recorded, but the Japanese gave him the nickname Yasuko. He'd come over to Japan on a Portuguese missionary boat. By all accounts he and Nobunaga got along great, and he fought in several major battles of Japan's warring states period. Sadly, after Nobunaga's death, Akechi Mitsuhides declared Yasuko to be not a man, but an animal, and had him sent to a nearby Christian church that had been established by missionaries. There is no record of what happened to him after that. One day Mao Zedong saw a sparrow eating grain. Thinking that the sparrows were hurting China's grain supply, he and the Communist Party launched the Four Pests campaign. The Chinese military and population killed every sparrow they could find. Embassies didn't allow the Chinese to kill sparrows on their property, so the Chinese banged pots and pans outside the embassies 24/7 until the sparrows died of exhaustion. Unfortunately for the Chinese, sparrows mainly eat insects, not grain. The locust population exploded and 43 million people starved to death. There is an extremely rare condition called Stone Man syndrome. It causes any smallest damage done to tissue to regrow into a bone. Speaking briefly, people affected by this sickness slowly turn into living statues as they get older. Surgical removal of the extra bone growths has been shown to cause the body to repair the affected area with even more bone. I'll never sleep again. I saw a documentary on that once. One advanced sufferer had to explain to a young girl with the syndrome that at some point she was going to have to make a choice, be frozen forever standing up, or be frozen forever sitting down, and the pros and cons of both. Utterly chilling. I have managed to find the documentary, and have timestamped it to where her mother, not the kid herself, I misremembered, meets Robert Kinghorn, the man I mentioned. As of 2016 she was still going, age 17, although the disease had progressed. Another fun fact about V2 rockets. Germany was facing a large issue with rocket fuel shortages during the project, because people kept drinking it. The fuel was made from 70% ethyl alcohol and 30% water, distilled from potatoes. It was the most economically viable fuel at the time, since they were already very low on other fuels. To stop workers from drinking it, they denatured the alcohol, essentially poisoning it, but people kept drinking it anyways, and getting extremely ill. This simply caused people to start leaving the V2 program, suggesting that they were only in it for the free alcohol. This also means that any alcohol over 70% ABV is stronger than actual WW2 rocket fuel. The life of Frane Selak, the luckiest unlucky man in the world. January 1962. Frane is riding on a train through a freezing canyon when it fell into an icy river. All 17 other passengers died, while he escapes with a broken arm and hypothermia. 1963. On his first plane trip he was sucked out of the plane's door and landed in a haystack, unscathed. 19 other people were killed in the crash. 1966. He was riding in a bus when it skidded off the road into yet another icy river. 4 passengers drowned, while he only received some minor cuts and bruises. 1970. His car's engine burst into flames while he was driving, but he managed to escape before it exploded. 1973, in yet another driving incident, his car's engine was doused with hot oil from a broken fuel pump. This caused flames to shoot through the air vents, singing off all of his hair. He was otherwise unharmed. 1995, he was hit by a bus, but only sustained minor injuries. 1996, to escape a head-on collision with a United Nations truck on a mountain curve, he swerved into a guardrail that broke on impact. To save himself, he jumped out of his car's open door and grabbed onto a tree branch as he watched his car plummet off the cliff. Suffice to say, the guy had a complicated relationship with the Grim Reaper. Got his name wrong, got the first edit wrong. Turns out I was right the first time. If every single person on the entire planet took part in a rock paper scissors contest, where everyone paired up and played, losers were knocked out and winners stayed on, etc., you would only have to win 33 times in a row to beat all 7.53 billion people on the planet. If you're launching from Earth, the most difficult place to reach in the solar system is the Sun. The reason for this is that to fly directly into the Sun you need to first launch from Earth, and then remove all of your orbital velocity around the Sun. Anything less will just put you into a different orbit around the Sun, rather than directly into it. The amount of power required for that to do it directly is basically impossible currently. As an alternative, you could, for relatively little power, fly all the way out to Pluto distance, slow down much less, and then fall back into the Sun. The trade-off being the travel time is now about 90 years. There's other in-between paths that could get you there for different balances of energy and time, but all of them are tougher than getting basically anywhere else in the solar system with an equivalent balance. There's a mission currently traveling to study the Sun, the Parker Solar Probe. It won't be flying directly in, but plans to make the closest passes than any probe ever has. It's going to make 7 passes by Venus to shed speed, so it can get closer and closer to the Sun. The full flight time is planned as just less than 7 years. As of this post, they are 1 week shy of a year in. Switzerland has accidentally invaded Liechtenstein thrice in the last 50 years. On the first time in 1976, Swiss military got lost and ended up in Liechtenstein, so the Liechtensteiners offered them drinks like proper hosts. On the second time in 1992, Swiss military forgot that a certain observation post was actually not in Swiss territory, but in Liechtenstein territory, so they just said sorry and forgot about it. Then again in 2007, the Swiss army got lost and entered Liechtenstein, but eventually realized they weren't in Switzerland anymore, Toto, so they turned back. Liechtenstein didn't even know this happened till the Swiss apologized, again, to which they basically said, no problem, bro. Takeaways: the Swiss army are bad with directions. The Liechtenstein army people are chill bros. The morbidly obese person can survive with absolute starvation without any sickness or feeling ill, under close control. There have been studies since 60s. There is a patient in 1973 who went under a 382-day starvation diet for therapeutic purposes under close control with only vitamin and mineral supplements and water intake without protein, carbohydrate or fat intake, no food at all. Dropped from 207 kilograms to 88 kilograms and maintained it. After a follow-up checkup 5 years later, the patient was 96 kilograms, stabilized. Prolonged fasting had no ill effects. If Earth was a basketball, to scale the moon would be a tennis ball. It would orbit around 7.5 meters away, which is a lot farther than most people think. If the nucleus of a hydrogen atom was a tennis ball, to scale the electron would orbit at about 2,500 meters away. There is no ball small enough to compare to how small electrons would still be at this scale. There is no good metric for the number of languages on Earth. This is mostly because linguists cannot agree on what constitutes a new language and what constitutes a dialect of an existing language. The best current metric of how many languages exist is the number of translations of the Christian Bible. Fun little anecdote about the Bible translations into obscure languages. A missionary from our church works for a mission that translates the Bible into languages heretofore untranslated and adapts the books and chapters into an audiobook app. He was in a taxi in Kenya and asked the driver what his language was. The driver told him in English that he spoke Swahili. The missionary pressed him and asked if he spoke a local tribal language. The driver said he did and referenced an obscure language he was sure the missionary wouldn't know. The missionary pulled up that language on the app and started playing the audiobook from some passage in the Bible, whereupon the astonished driver proclaimed, "That's my home tribe's language, and that's my cousin's voice." Just a funny little story that your comment reminded me of. There was this French guy named Terrar in the late 1700s that could eat anything, in any amount. He was able to eat a quarter of a cow on one day, and ate dinner for 15 for one meal, when he was being tested. He was even able to swallow an entire eel, with bones included, without hesitating. When he went to the military service, they used him as message transport, but after being captured he went back, and tried to find a cure. In the hospital where he was staying, he was suspected of eating a baby, so they kicked him out. He was average weight, and when he died a few years later they could see inside his stomach, just by opening his mouth. There's a 1 in roughly 5.2 to the 61st power chance that, if you were to slap a table, all of the molecules in your hand, and the table would miss each other, and your hand would go through it. I learned this fact from a deep intellectual conversation with my engineering class 2 years ago, so there very well could be some kind of detail I'm missing here, but nonetheless, what I said is theoretically true. Water is the only substance that expands and becomes less dense as it cools. If it didn't, ice would sink to the bottom of the ocean, and eventually freeze the entire planet except a thin skim of water on the surface as the sun shone down on it. Basically, life would never occur. I spend a lot of time on the history videos that put things into scale a bit more. Also, kind of morbid, but Ringo Starr almost didn't get a gig with the Beatles, because they thought he was too old for their band. Take in mind who's still alive and making music. I am aware their deaths weren't natural causes, but I find that funny. There's a non-zero possibility that you could molecularly decompose or fall apart. Your atoms could all suddenly combust. Your atoms could align perfectly with a chair so that you could fall through it. It is so unfathomable how unlikely it is, but it is still possible. Also, look up Joe Rogan explaining infinity. Might keep you up at night. The Canadian government had a secret homosexual detecting device called the Ferd machine, which it used to find gay men and purge them from their jobs. The Yakuza regularly strip down to their underpants and blow whistles, while riding golden shrines through the streets on the shoulders of dozens of men in loincloths. If your husband fucks another woman, you can sue her for compensation. Wumbus poop pubes. Spearfish, South Dakota, holds the world record for the fastest recorded temperature change. On January 22, 1943, at about 7:30 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, the temperature in Spearfish was 4 degrees Fahrenheit 20 degrees centigrade. The Chinook wind picked up speed rapidly, and 2 minutes later, 7:32 a.m., the temperature was plus 45 degrees Fahrenheit, plus 7 degrees centigrade, above zero. The 49 degrees Fahrenheit or 27 degrees centigrade rise in 2 minutes set a world record that still holds. By 9 a.m., the temperature had risen to 54 degrees Fahrenheit, 12 degrees centigrade. Suddenly, the Chinook died down and the temperature tumbled back to 4 degrees Fahrenheit or 20 degrees centigrade. The 58 degrees Fahrenheit or 32.2 degrees centigrade drop took only 27 minutes. The most popular paint color during the 1800s was called mummy brown. It was made out of Egyptian mummies. Both humans and animals, cats, primarily. It was incredibly popular for a few decades, then fell out of favor, largely because they ran out of mummies to grind into pigments. Scientists have had massive difficulty studying the cognitive behaviors of domestic cats. Not because they're not as intelligent as dogs, but because they're too stubborn and individualistic to cooperate with researchers. The Smithsonian and my cat being a fucking jackass. The Monty Hall problem: suppose you're on a game show, and you're given the choice of 3 doors. Behind one door is a car, behind the others, goats. You pick a door, say number 1, and the host, who knows what's behind the doors, opens another door, say number 3, which is a goat. He then says to you, do you want to pick door number 2? Is it to your advantage to switch your choice? The correct answer is that, if you switch your choice, you have a 2/3 chance of winning. If you stand pat with your original choice, you only have a 1/3 chance of winning. As many people died in the First Battle of Bull Run, alternatively, the First Battle of Manassas, as in the entire Revolutionary War. The Civil War resulted in more American deaths, 620,000, than both world wars combined, 521,000. The scale of the conflict is hard to truly grasp. So apparently these numbers are questionable. I got this from the museum at Manassas, but see extended discussion below. The takeaway for me is that the Civil War was a lot bigger than a lot of people realize. The solar system does not end where Pluto is, or even nearby beyond Pluto. It actually ends at a distance that is 5,000 times the distance of Sun to Pluto. Astounding. And then there's the emptiness of space before you enter the sphere of nearest star Proxima Centauri. Hunting animals can sometimes lead to larger populations of that same animal. The idea of a carrying capacity exists, because there's a limit to the speed at which resources cycle or become available. When a population is above carrying capacity, the population will decrease as individuals starve. What is important is that these individuals don't just die, they will try to survive, and in doing so will reduce the number of available resources to others, while still failing to reproduce. By culling animal populations back to the carrying capacity, ethical hunters can actually help the population by reducing the number of eating animals to a sustainable one and ensure a better distributing of resources, preventing a population crash. Stonehenge, the world's most famous henge, isn't actually a henge. A henge is a Neolithic earthworks, circular or oval in shape, sometimes containing stone or wooden structures, and with a perimeter of a bank then ditch. So, what people think of as the henge part of Stonehenge, the stones, aren't what would be the henge anyway, they are an optional extra. It is the ditch and bank perimeter that officially make a henge, and at Stonehenge they are the wrong way around to be a proper henge. Now the bit that makes this fact so baffling it should be false is that the origin of the word henge can be traced no further back than the naming of Stonehenge, so despite not even being a proper henge, Stonehenge is the henge all actual henges are named after. One of the implications of the theory of relativity is that light does not experience the passage of time, because it travels at light speed and experiences time dilation. So, for the photons that reach Earth from billions of light years away, such as the microwave background radiation left over from the birth of the universe, the billions of years of transit time are an instant. Entire civilizations rose and fell, with their languages coming into existence and going extinct in that moment experienced by a photon in transit. Entire star systems are born, mature, get consumed by the aging star, and die in a nova, and that time is as nothing to those photons. Not proven, because if we could ever prove it, we'd all likely be dead, but there is probably stuff called strange matter inside neutron stars. Essentially, it is the ideal state of matter. If two neutron stars collide, this strange matter could go hurling across the universe in the form of tiny undetectable particles. If one of these particles hit Earth, it would almost instantly assimilate all matter on the planet into more strange matter, and in like 15 minutes everything we've ever known would be a ball of strange matter roughly 10 miles across.